Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's staff meeting. We are going to be discussing the topic of the federal government and their involvement in educational policy and procedures. To start off with, I'd just like to have a short conversation about being considerate and being respectful of other people's opinions as we begin this discussion. Unfortunately, the discussion that we're going to have today can be very politically charged. Some people feel that the federal government should have a great deal of involvement in local affairs such as education or personal affairs such as healthcare. And other people feel that the federal government should have a very limited role in those personal choices and local responsibilities in education. So just to start off with, I want to make sure that we're all being very understanding that everybody has different opinions and being very respectful of your colleagues as we move through the discussion topics that I'll be bringing up today. So to start off with, my personal views on government involvement in education is that I do agree with the overall idea behind and supporting ideas behind the Common Core standards. I feel that national standards can be very helpful, especially when you have an extremely transient population as we do here in Maryland. We have students who move in and out consistently from Washington, D.C., Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. And when we look at the standards that were previously being taught by all these different states, they're very different at each different grade level. And unfortunately, we were finding with some students who were coming in, they were well behind where our curriculum expected them to be, or they were more advanced than our curriculum expected them to be. And this made the transition into our school even more difficult for those students. So I think that the idea that all students would be learning the same skills at the same grade level across the country, I think that that can be helpful in many educational situations. I also feel that state representatives should be working together to determine these standards. And then I feel that it should be the local government's responsibility to implement those standards and also to determine assessments. I think this was a big problem that I personally had with the way that the Common Core standards were implemented is the creation of these national assessments. I don't think that one national assessment can address the needs of all of our students, particularly students receiving special education services, students who are limited English proficient, and for all of those categories to be compared across the board when you're determining annual measurable objectives and adequate yearly progress, I think that becomes a problem for individual districts and areas depending on their demographics and makeup. So I think that the government should have a controlled role in education. I don't think they should be making every specific decision and taking over the power of the local governments to decide what's best for their students. Just as within my district, I feel that sometimes our district is very large and the decisions that are made at the top that impact the 150,000 students in our district just aren't feasible for some of the small local areas within our district. So I feel that the federal government definitely needs to have somewhat of a role in education, but that it be limited and monitored by the state and local governments. Through my research that I did on the Common Core standards, there were unfortunately many more cons or anti-Common Core resources than pro-Common Core. And I feel like this has been a dramatic shift from when the Common Core was first introduced. Many states first adopted the Common Core and are now discussing rescinding their adoption of the Common Core and are moving away from those standards that they initially accepted and also the assessments that they initially agreed to participate in, whether they be the PARCC assessment or one of the other Common Core approved assessments. One of the pro Common Core sources that I did come across that I wanted you guys to discuss today was written by Jennifer Wallace, who is a teaching and learning PhD student at the University of North Dakota. And in her article, Wallander explains that there are 4 major historical justifications for the development of the Common Core. One being creating common educational standards, The next being preparing students for college. The next being stressing quality education for all students. And finally, increasing rigor in schools. So educational reform has been a very serious topic in education since 1982, when the Committee of 10 attempted to conform the high school educational standards to increase rigor and prepare certain students for college. I apologize, 1892, not 1982. And this was one of the first true higher level federal government investigations into education and how education as a nation could be improved. So the implementation of the Common Core is simply the culmination of many federal attempts to improve our educational system, as we are currently performing significantly below other similarly developing nations in our educational performance on international assessments. So I think that the reasoning behind the Common Core is definitely just. However, I think that the implementation of it in our schools is not working out as well as we would have hoped. And as Maryland has adopted the Common Core, I can say from personal experience that it has been a very rocky adaptation in my school, in our school. So at this time, I would like you guys to discuss together as a staff, what are some of the pros of the Common Core? What do you see as the benefits that our school has experienced since we implemented the Common Core fully this school year? All right, everyone, thank you for participating in that discussion, and we will be creating a web of pros that we have discussed and you have brought up today. I found a number of resources that address some of the negative influences of the Common Core standards as seen by many educators in many states throughout the nation. A lot of recent research reflects a plethora of anti-Common Core articles and publications. Looking through any news sources, there are many critics currently of the Common Core. With our 2016 election coming up next year, we have many political presidential candidates weighing in on their feelings towards the Common Core and our Race to the Top initiative. And many are very dissatisfied and are separating themselves from those standards that were previously supported by many politicians. And a lot of states, as I discussed before, are really rescinding their adoption of the Common Core standards. Here in Maryland, we are not currently attempting to rescind our adoption of the Common Core, but many other states are. In an article that questions overall federal involvement in education, author Aaron Lawson, a University of Michigan Law School graduate, discusses the development of the Common Core standards and the further involvement of the federal government in education, and discusses that it has not had a positive impact on the achievement gap. So looking at our educational data, as the federal government has become more involved in local education, the achievement gap has actually widened as opposed to decreasing. So he discusses a great deal on why it should be more of a local responsibility, and that actually by having federal laws and policies pertaining to education, it's taking away the ability of the states and local governments to develop a better system of education for their local area. This paper really discusses a lot of the legal implications of federal government and states versus federal rights according to our Constitution. And this author really felt that the increased involvement of federal government in education has limited state and local government's ability to protect the educational rights of students, and that the federal government has really overstepped its boundaries in the development and implementation of the Common Core standards and other educational policies being implemented. The author specifically cites widening achievement gaps in New York City and New York State public schools within his article, and it's very interesting to see how wide are achievement gaps for special education students, for students receiving English as second language services, and also students of different racial minority backgrounds. And unfortunately, those gaps just don't seem to be closing, even with all of these federal initiatives and supports that are supposed to be being implemented at the local level. So I'd like you to go ahead at this time and discuss in your groups, as we did with the pros for the Common Core, some of the cons against the Common Core that you feel our school has experienced with our implementation of these standards this school year. All right, well, thank you for discussing those topics. We will add them to our pros and cons web. And after adding them at our next staff meeting, we'll have further discussions over whether we have more pros or more cons and what we can do to help the implementation of these standards be more successful at our school for the next school year. That will be one of our topics of professional development as we come back to our teacher training in services prior to the start of the 2015-2016 school year. So one action that I would recommend in order to take our public education back is to remove stipulations for assessment performance in order to receive federal funding for educational programs. Although federal funding only accounts to about 10% of educational funding, that's still an extremely large number of dollars being spent at the school levels, and I don't think that taking money away from a struggling school helps it to be more successful. I think by reducing funding and increasing sanctions for failing programs, we are only making matters worse and hurting our students. So I think there need to be changes on federal sanctions and policies regarding the assessment performance for schools and how that affects funding. Another action that I would recommend is rethinking the idea that all students must be college and career ready. Although I feel it is extremely important to set very high standards for all of our students, I think it's unrealistic to expect all children to be college ready. I think they all need to meet very high standards, but expecting all of our students to attend college, I think puts a lot of pressure on our staff members, our teachers, especially for students who receive special education services and are truly struggling with accessing the general education curriculum and require a great deal of cognitive and developmental support. But also, it would never be in the best interest of our nation for all students to attend a four-year college, as a significant number of careers that are essential to our workforce don't require college-level training. In fact, many students end up attending college programs and incurring debt when other training programs would have been more appropriate for their desired careers, and those careers are essential to the infrastructure of our country. So I think that the idea of college for career readiness is an essential point that should be brought back into education. I think we've moved away and we've put a negative connotation on students who don't attend college. And there are many students who are extremely successful in their future careers who take other educational routes to those careers. So I think that's just something important for parents and teachers and federal legislators to have in mind, that yes, we should be pushing all of our students to the highest level and to excel as high as possible, but that they need to have more than one road that they feel is the best road to take for them. So questions to think about as we move forward are, what are your thoughts on federal government involvement in education, and where do you think the line should be drawn for the oversight and the policy making that is directed towards education? Also, the Department of Education, do you think this department is overly large considering the scope of its power, or do you think it's the appropriate size? The Common Core standards, we're going to continue to discuss the pros and cons of the Common Core. Although we have, as a state, chosen to implement them, I think it's always important to consider both sides of the discussion when it pertains to a very controversial topic at this time, and to think about what we can do to make our students more successful and to have a better educational experience at every level utilizing these Common Core standards that have been implemented in our state. So I wanted to thank you all for participating in our discussion today. And if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to address them with me after the staff meeting. Thank you.